DBAs, PacWest Lobby Group, Pacific Northwest Development Group, and Pacific Northwest Communications, and a couple of nonprofits that do economic development work around the state. I work in government affairs. I'm a new member. I've lived in Salem my whole life. Happy to be at my first meeting. Thank you.
Super to have you, Ryan. Thank you for making the investment of time. Michelle Warner.
Good morning, Michelle Warner, Salem Chamber.
Great. Shadia Jones.
Good morning, Shadia Jones with Coldwell Banker Commercial.
Thanks, Shadia. Scott Mitschke.
Good morning, Scott Mitschke. I'm representing Travel Salem this morning. Angie couldn't be here, so I'm here to gather all the good information. Thank you.
Great to have you on, Scott. Director Jonathan Castro Monroy.
Jonathan Castro with Castro Monroy Group.
Thanks, Jonathan. President Laura Dorn.
Good morning, everyone. Laura Dorn, Berkshire Hathaway Real Estate. And Rich, I wasn't going to admit I was at the chamber this morning too. But I hope we get back in person soon. Good to be here.
Thanks, Laura. Katie Kostick.
Morning, Katie Kostick with AC and Company Architecture.
Thanks, Katie. Derek Gilbert.
Morning, my name is Derek Gilbert. I'm with Donathan Servant Wealth Advisors.
Great to have you, Derek. Our own co-chair and vice president of advocacy, Jeff Miller, hailing from beautiful Black Butte.
Morning, everyone. Thanks for hopping on this morning. Jeff Miller, Coldwell Banker Commercial.
Thank you, Jeff. Board of Directors, Ted Ferry.
Good morning, everyone. Ted Ferry with State Farm.
Thanks, Ted. Nick Williams.
Good morning, Nick Williams, SVN Commercial Advisors.
Great to have you here, Nick. Representative Raquel Moore Green.
Good morning, Raquel Moore Green, State Representative, House District 19. Wonderful to see everybody, even if we're not in person.
Thank you for your service, Representative. Michael Dwayne Brown. I think we have Michael with us.
Michael Dwayne Brown, Legal Shield.
Thanks, Michael. Ryan Pascarella.
Good morning, Ryan Pascarella. I work for Grove, Mueller and Swank, and John Hawkins couldn't be here, so I'm here to listen in and share whatever information we can pick up.
Oh, super deal. We appreciate you stepping in for him. Mark Chan.
I am the Administrative Office Manager at OSU Extension in Marion County, and I really appreciate this group tackling a tough problem.
Thanks, Mark. Kathy Wilson. Do we have Kathy on the line? Okay, we'll skip to Director Jeff Dunn.
Morning all, Jeff Dunn with Lineage Logistics, Cold Storages.
Thanks, Jeff. Michael Gay with Salem Health.
Good morning, Michael Gay, Government Relations and Communications at Salem Health. Happy to be with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Past President Brent D. Hart.
Good morning, everyone. Brent D. Hart, Salem Aviation Fueling.
Awesome. Jordan Truitt.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Jordan Truitt here with First Commercial Real Estate.
Great to have you on, Jordan.
Sorry for my late arrival.
Oh, you're just fine. Right on time. Zachary and TJ, I believe that does it for our self-introductions. And my apologies if I missed anyone, but TJ, we're going to turn it back over to you for introduction of our speakers.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, today we've got a lot of folks that are at the forefront of the unsheltered neighbors issue in our city. I'm not going to say it's a problem. I will just say that it's an issue. I know in meeting with folks at SEDCOR, as they're working on recruiting businesses to town, they've been taking them down to the Kubler I-5 interchange and bringing them in that way rather than getting off at Market Street, so that they could posit Salem in the best possible light. And so so today we're going to be talking about the Navigation Center, something that's new that's coming, and I don't know what people know about it, or, it's one of those things where it's the old telephone game where you start talking about something, you tell one person, and then they tell another person, and by the time it gets back, it's completely changed and morphed into something that's not accurate. And so this is our chance to connect with the people that are at the forefront of this, and to pick their brain and listen to what they can tell us from the front lines, as it were. So we've got Gretchen Bennett, and Gretchen works for the city of Salem, and she engages with community members, service providers, and all interested in the topic of unsheltered homelessness issues in the city of Salem. And Gretchen is the liaison to homelessness issues, and she works in the mayor's office. And she's been with the city of Salem for 8 years, and she's a former Leadership Salem graduate, and she is no relation to Mayor Chuck Bennett. And Chuck has been our mayor since January 4th, 2017. And he is crazy enough to serve 3 terms as mayor. And he's been on city council for, how long have you been on city council, Chuck? Somebody unmute him.
I was on the council for 9 years before that.
Okay, yeah.
So I don't know, it's been 13 years, something like that.
Yeah. 9 glorious years of serving with me and
Brent and
yeah, Brent and Brad. Yeah, those were the good old days.
They were.
Chuck is thoughtful and really good at listening to all sides and trying to find common ground. He's been active. His service to the city includes the sidewalk replacement program, increased funding for public safety and other livability initiatives. He's a former member of the Oregon House of Representatives, and he retired in 2018 as the Director of Government Relations for the Confederation of Oregon School Administrators. He began his career as a newspaper reporter and editor at the Salem Capital Journal and other newspapers in Staten and Woodburn. Also with us today is Jimmy Jones, and he's the Executive Director of the Mid-Willamette Valley Community Action Agency. He oversees more than 200 grants and a staff of 450 people in 8 programs, including weatherization, energy, home, youth, and resource center, nutrition first, reentry services, child care resources and referral, Head Start, and the Arches Project, in addition to the agency's finance and administration. Combined, these projects provide more than $60 million in services to the Salem Kaiser community. They serve more than 50,000 clients in our area the past year. Jimmy is a subject matter expert in chronic homelessness, and in particular, he played a major role in the statewide introduction of evidence-based practices and tools and the development of a coordinated entry system for 28 of the 36 Oregon counties. He is also the chair of the statewide community action partnership of Oregon's legislative work. He is a father of 6 children and 5 grandchildren. He lives with his wife, Jackie, and 4 cats in Kaiser. 4 is still an acceptable number. And when you get to 8 cats, then we have to have a conversation.
I'm not sure that 4 is an acceptable number, TJ.
Okay. Yeah, it's pushing.
It's borderline crazy, but
yeah. Yeah, we'll send over some help later. Jimmy enjoys long distance backpacking, playing chess with his sons, going to mass at St. Edward's, distance running, baseball, there you go, and reading. Thank you, Jimmy, for joining us today.
Really glad to be here, TJ.
Awesome. So with that, we're going to engage with Gretchen on just what the heck is a navigation center.
I love it. I love it, TJ. And before I get there, I'm going to be interested in the group's feedback on how Market Street looks these days. We're just delighted to have been able to partner with the state of Oregon to have the Market and I-5 camp people who were there be redirected and have other options for where they are. So we're working right now on continuing to help that area be as clean as possible, working with nearby property owners. So you'll have to give me feedback on how that's looking. Love the, oh, go ahead, TJ, I'm sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say, the number one question that a lot of people are asking is about where did everybody go that was there? And I know that to me, it was like, it was the perfect example of how the no sit lie ordinance should work, because I know that we had services that were close by. So as those folks were displaced, that the services that they needed were right there, so that they could hopefully get some additional resources and help to find their way to a better way of life.
That's my hope too. And I want to appreciate Denny's Restaurant for hosting a number of organizations, including Jimmy's, to help talk with people and try to connect people as that whole event was passing. I have to have another introductory selfish comment too, which is love the Liberty House conversation. That was where I was prior to the city. And there's a question in the chat about the Liberty House event. So I want to make sure to spotlight that so that folks get that good information to her. Also appreciate TJ's question about or observation of the telephone game, because it has been fascinating to think about a navigation center, and it's sort of a funny term that some are new to. So I'm delighted to begin this conversation with those remarks. And in simple, what it is a place where people who may or may not be eligible for other shelters or find other shelters to be the right fit for them to be able to receive shelter, that's safety, beds at night where the door is locked and you're secure and your items are secure, and to be able to build relationships with people who have expertise and training in working with situations to help you navigate the next steps, simply put, for a specific cohort of people. It helps to think about what it isn't. I mean, it's not going to be Siri or Google navigation for every single person in Salem. We don't expect to be directing thousands of people in every day. I understand Jimmy plans to continue the Arches Day Center, which is another terrific resource for people in the community to be able to ask questions. Another thing that it isn't, when you hear low barrier or you hear people for whom they may not qualify for other locations, that doesn't mean it's mayhem and madness and no rules and anything goes. It's more of an adaptation of the shelter's approach to work to design a program and services and rules that might fit a group of people that traditionally do have barriers to getting into things. But that doesn't mean there won't be guest expectations, and there won't be a process of support and a process for clarifying what's expected. And Jimmy will break all of that down for you. The other question that I was asked to talk about is change. So like, what will this change for Salem? And I'm delighted to also have the other speakers here, because I think they'll partially unpack that as well. But really, there are at once a number of themes that people who are unsheltered experience, and at the same time, so many unique situations. This navigation center is a critical option. If we're going to be successful, there needs to be a number of options, a variety of options, a variety of approaches, so that we can best have solutions. Not everybody's going to go, it's not a one size fits all, it's not a one meal deal kind of a thing. We need different people will connect in different ways and find the right place in different ways. And if we don't have choices, we're not going to be successful having people leave Market and I-5. And so one of the things it is a really critical choice that I think will be a life changer for those who choose to go there. Another thing it is it's an option for us with alternative shelter. Many have asked, and I've had many conversations about the regulatory side of this. And can't we just say, you know, no, you can't live outside, you know, a park and a sidewalk is not a forever home. And part of managing our public spaces and part of the regulatory side requires having alternative options. It's just necessary from a legal standpoint to have options for people to go when we're also trying to say where people can't go. So it's just so critical to have some places. That also leads to the blessing of the Union Gospel Mission expansion and some of the other great work that's being done around the community. For me, this is going to be life-changing for the people who are able to get to come and stay there and work with the expert team of the Community Action Agency. It will also be, it will also be a part of a broader continuum, and it will be successful predicated upon what's next and our community's ability to stand up those next steps. You can come in, get stable, get focused, get connected, and start to plan your next. But if that next isn't there, that's going to be a challenge. And so if you start thinking about what are those nexts? Research tells us sometimes those nexts are chemical dependency treatment, and sometimes those nexts is an affordable, accessible housing unit. And sometimes those nexts is what we call supportive housing, which Salem Housing Authority has launched with Redwood Crossings this year. There's a variety of types of nexts, but I believe our community is going to want to be all about that and making sure that we stand up lots of nexts so that Jimmy can keep moving people in, bring them in, get them connected to the next. That's going to be key for all of us. So I hope that helps introduce the topic. For me, it's an essential part of our overall ability to be successful with having people make different choices so that we can have the Salem that we want for everybody who's here. So I'll stop there, TJ, and see if I answered the questions that you needed me to answer.
Yes, if people have questions, if you want to put them in the chat comments, that would be great. So where will this navigation center be?
Yes, we just closed on a property. Jonathan, it's by you. Jonathan Castro Monroy. It's, you go down Mission and you're heading east on Mission and you're gonna take a right on 22nd, and it's on 22nd Avenue Southeast. This is formerly a building that was owned by the Department of Human Services. I'm kind of old school now, and I used to know it as the old AFS building, for those of you that might anchor. And for us, it's a really good property. It's a property that it has the space and the type of size to be able to do focused work with the cohort that will be there, the cohorts that will transition through there. So 22nd Avenue Southeast.
Okay, thank you. And I think one of the things that, I mean, I'm glad that we have the opportunity to, you know, you're right, we do need to have this places for people to go, to tell them where they can't go. And I think one of the things that has been hard to watch is, you know, I feel like I'm watching people just slowly destroy themselves. And when we give them a safe place to say, you can go here and you can camp here and destroy yourself slowly. I know there was an article in the Statesman, and it just feels like this year has been a record number of homeless deaths in our community. And I don't know if there's any kind of validity to that number, or to that idea that this year has seen a record number of people dying on the streets.
You know, I'm going to ask Jimmy to help us with that question. Jimmy's been focused on some statewide legislative assistance to try to help us understand more about the data. I don't myself have my hands on those numbers to have a good sense of the trends, but it's something I worry about. There's barriers to people coming in and accessing when we stand up a cooling center or we stand up a warming shelter. Folks, what I hear is folks don't want to leave their stuff, or they don't want to leave their spot. They're fearful of taking advantage of some of those life-changing things. Other times people may have behavioral health barriers to coming indoors and being in a more of a congregate setting, which is why the city partnered with Community Action and FEMA to stand up non-congregate or hotel approaches so that there could be some privacy for people to come in and be able to have a room to lock their door. That was pretty important. But to your specific question about that, I would refer to Jimmy.
Okay.
If I can just jump in there, Gretchen. So the answer to the number of deaths outside in the last couple of years is unknown because there are no accounting procedures anywhere that account for the number of people who are passing away, either literally outside or because they had to go into the hospital and they were outside previously or just recently housed. That metric has never been tracked anywhere in the country except for a few metro areas, and even there, not consistently. I do my own counting, and we've lost close to 35, 36. Those are the ones I know of in the last 18 months. Some of them died outside. Some of them died in a hospital. Some of them got infections because they've been outside for so long, like MRSA. Some people just, are in very, very poor health. Living outside for about 10 years will age you dramatically over that course of time. The average age of death of the people in the homeless community that we've been tracking the last 5 years is 52. And they're dying of all the same things the rest of us are dying from. They're just dying much more quickly. So we were able at the legislative level to get a statewide homeless death reporting law enacted. It's the first one in the country that will track homeless deaths across the entire state, across the entire year, so that we can get better information and plan services to address it.
All right, thank you for that. All right, we'll turn now to Mayor Bennett to talk about how the city is going to partner in this navigation center.
Well, thank you, TJ, and thank you very much for giving us an opportunity to talk with you about this facility, maybe a little broader on the what's termed the homeless issue. I think a couple of things I've learned over the years I've served on council, and particularly as mayor, is this is an incredibly complex issue. It is not one, it's presented sort of monolithically as the homeless. The reality is it's one of the most complicated human resource issues every community in the United States is facing. These are our neighbors. These are children that have grown up here and become adults. These are people who have lived in our community for many years. And one of the great challenges is meeting people where they are, talking to them and meeting with them and finding the kind of individual solutions. It's really, in my opinion, at least my experience, it's been really one person at a time. The issues are as complicated as any life can be, and it has the complexity of turning people away from what's been, as Jimmy, I think, so correctly states, a genuinely self-destructive lifestyle. If you're dying at 52 after long-term homelessness, that is not the direction we need to be having people going. And so it takes also then fairly complex systems to address it. When I became mayor, the issue in front of us on homelessness, the way it was being discussed was, how do we stop people from panhandling? All wrong, all wrong. It couldn't have been a bigger failure to address what's fundamentally at stake here, which is moving people away from a lifestyle back into the mainstream of society. And that's what this navigation center is part of. In a larger context, Salem has been incredibly active in the past 4 years, developing a variety of alternatives for people. And they're in different kinds of units. They're in different kinds of living situations. They have different levels of system support, wraparound services, it's often called. It is not cheap. It is not simple. It requires specialized handling. We're so lucky to have Jimmy Jones here. One of the best things that could have happened to me as I became mayor was to have Jimmy Jones becoming the head of the Community Action Agency with the special expertise in this area he brings to the table. And then the city manager making, I think, a genuinely enlightened choice of having Gretchen Bennett directly in the mayor's and city manager's office available to us to help us with the kind of policy decisions we needed to be making over the past several years to begin to address this problem. And it is a problem. I mean, it kind of, when people have to drive to Kubler because they don't want to come in on Market, we got a problem. I mean, it may not be life-ending, but it's troubling. And I think it's symptomatic of the impact homelessness can have on a community. I think all you have to do is look north to Portland to see what really can happen when it gets totally out of control. So for years, we have been working on this issue of a navigation center. We really started working on it about 4 years ago, a little over 4 years ago, and realized that we can deal with the capital, the cost of the building, and we did. We've spent $3 million buying the building that Gretchen described over on 22nd. I will say, I toured it with Kurt Arthur. It was a remarkable property to have come on the market and be as available at the right price. And Jimmy can correct me, but I couldn't believe how perfect it looked to me for the kind of service and activity we were describing in a navigation center. We took our issue to the state legislature, realizing we did not have the operational resources. We do a lot of things really, really, really well. We do police, we do fire, we do water, we do streets. You know, we have a whole package of services we do. One of them has not been social services. And I think wisely, we've been smart enough not to bring that into City Hall. We've farmed that out and really worked closely with Community Action Agency and really the dozens of other nonprofit organizations in the community to develop the kind of individualized services that people need based on the specialties they're involved in. So we went to the legislature 4 years ago. We ran into problems when the quorum issues arose and were able to get it. We had it in the bills ready to go. We had our funding in place, and then the legislature stopped meeting. We've been very fortunate. This community has been wildly fortunate to have Peter Courtney as the Senate president and his commitment to this and a whole batch of other issues. And that's a whole nother topic. But Peter has kept this issue alive, kept it alive for us, and we got it through this session. And we're able to develop the funding for the next couple of years with state help. That in a couple of years is going to come to an end. We will try not to let it come to an end, but I can just forecast there'll be a question as to whether the community is committed to this kind of really, I think, visionary direction, using this kind of a facility to address the whole range of issues that come in front of the community relative to homelessness. So we'll be turning to the community, I think, in cooperation with the other nonprofits to make sure that we continue to address this using this kind of center, the Arches program with its day use, all of the other, and I really don't want to leave anybody out, so I won't mention anybody else, but I do want to mention specifically Union Gospel Mission and the tremendous new program they've brought online, and the quality program they brought online, assisting men and women through various parts of the homeless phenomenon and the kind of life-changing choices that need to be made. We will be looking for, like I said, a continued community assistance, but I don't see it occurring through City Hall. I think City Hall will be part of the discussion. We will assist in the kind of both fundraising and resource allocation that it takes. But this is going to be a couple of years for us to really understand how this program works. And Jimmy can go into real detail on it. But how this program really augments all of the other things we're doing. Just one statistic, I believe, in Gretchen, you can correct me, but my recollection is we're adding or have added up to about 500 new dwelling type, all kinds of units, and are looking at more. We're not stopping now. This is one where we don't want to have people just live in shelters. We have got to get these people back into society in a productive, meaningful way. That's what Jimmy Jones and the other nonprofits are committed to. And I can't tell you how important I think that will be as we move forward. And we not kid ourselves that tents in parks or tents on streets or guys on mattresses on streets or any of the other visuals we see or we have had described to us is an alternative. This is not a place where you get to where you have to live outdoors. And we're doing everything we can to move that forward. And what we'd really like to do is have enough housing, meaningful long-term housing available to address the myriad of needs out there, and particularly be prepared for people who re-enter society, probably at lower income jobs, and have the ability to pay rent, to buy food, to pay electricity, all the rest of it, but to become back to reintegrate into the workforce as well. This involves seniors, it involves families, it involves children, it involves youth, it involves men and women with addictions, with mental health issues. I mean, I can go on and on describing this population. Our job is to help these folks rejoin our community in a meaningful way, not just be a drag on the community. So that's the commitment from City Hall. And I think it's one that I can truly say is long-term. We're working closely with our other government agencies. We're working closely with the county and the state. They understand we're going to be forward leaning on this. So I really look forward to hearing Jimmy on how this all works, because he really, I've heard him before talk about it, and I find it very compelling.
Yeah, good. That's a good transition. There is a question on how surrounding neighbors to this navigation center are going to be alerted to the change of use. And is there going to be a point of contact for if there are issues that arise?
Yeah, I think, TJ, the operational details, I think, are going to be in Jimmy's hands. He knows how to do this. I'm certain there will be a variety of mitigations to make this not an intrusion, or as least an intrusion as possible into that neighborhood. That's an up and coming part of the city.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it really is. It's one of the really many, I think, success stories in this community has been the resurgence of that Mission Street corridor. We're just waiting now on what happens at the old Capchev site, and a couple of others. We're redoing the public works buildings. There's a lot going on out there. This will augment that community, I believe. I think it will be a service that will help tremendously as that part of the community continues to improve.
TJ, I can add to the answer on that question. I'm happy to be a point of contact for people who have questions about, well, why here? Why did you buy this building? Why didn't you buy that building? I'm happy to field those questions. If people have specific questions about, hey, what are the guest expectations and how will it be managed? That's going to go to Jimmy's team.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing from surrounding property owners is like, hey, I've got my business here. I've got all my work vehicles, and I'm afraid that they're going to start getting broken into the second this opens up, which is maybe an unfair thing to be worried about or to characterize and say, if this opens, I'm going to be the subject of crime. But I think people just want to know like who to reach out to if there are issues.
Police
If
and
something,
and
yeah, absolutely. If there's a criminal issue happening, please do report. It's the only way that we can understand the issues and to
Right.
address the specific criminality. So please call Salem Police if there's a crime in place.
I'm sure they would.
Yeah, sometimes people think that I've had conversations where people are worried that it will be the unmanaged experience of like the Liberty Road Rite Aid block. And in this case, it's going to be managed, not that people aren't free, but that it's a different approach. It's not an unmanaged environment, but Jimmy will talk about that.
Okay, yeah, well, let's Jimmy, I'll turn it over to you with what the navigation center is going to look like. And one of the things we heard low barrier, and I think Gretchen was going to go into more detail on that. To me, when I've heard low barrier, I know that like the Union Gospel Mission won't take you if you're inebriated. And that to me is a barrier. So what is low barrier? What does that mean?
Sure. Well, good morning, everyone. And before I get started on the Navigation Center, I'd like to circle back a little bit to a couple of things that have come up in this conversation already. One is I get, in my frequent conversations with the public and with policymakers and with the community at large, many people are very frustrated with this issue, and they often say, well, what's being done? Enough's not being done because we see so many people outside and the suffering appears to be so great, and the environmental impact and the impact on businesses is so profound that more needs to be done. Well, this is a long game. It's a very long game, and I just want everybody to realize that a lot is being done, and especially a lot has been done in the last 4 years. The mayor is not going to toot his horn very loudly, but I can. You go back 4 years ago, we had the development of the HRAP program out of the Housing Authority, which was a partnership with my agency. We've housed nearly 300 chronically homeless individuals who had been homeless on average 8 years, living outside in unsheltered conditions, often with extraordinarily high barriers in terms of mental health and substance abuse over the course of that period of time. Last summer, we opened up Redwood Crossings, a 38-unit permanent supportive housing facility out there off Fisher. In the near future, the next couple of years, we've received funding from the state to open up a companion piece called Sequoia Crossings. That's going to be in North Salem up to, close to Kaiser. That'll be nearly another 100 units. In addition to that, we've had this very high functioning public-private partnership with the city, my agency and many other agencies that have allowed us to do a lot more work than what we've done in the past. The warming network, for example, 4 years ago, we had 700 bed nights for the entire winter. So a bed night is one person in one bed on one night. And so that's how we count the impact of our sheltering and our warming work across the community. So about 750 4 years ago. This past winter, we had 16,000 bed nights in Salem alone. 16,000. Now, a lot of that was run out of motels, but a lot of it was run out of traditional warming centers as well. So we've had a massive expansion of that kind of sheltering. City support for the Arches Project, which has allowed us to expand our work and increase our day center hours, have a bigger footprint than what we've ever had before. We've opened Taylor's House, which is the region's only overnight shelter for runaway and homeless youth. We have vet care now that we didn't have 4 years ago. We have Tanner's House, which is a veterans sheltering project for folks who served for this country at one point in time in their lives. And it's the only one between Medford and Vancouver, which has a priority for female veterans. We just purchased as an agency a new motel over there on Hawthorne that has 80 rooms. Many of them are doubles. We'll be able to take 100 individuals. That's a big number, 100 folks eventually off the streets and put them into that motel. We have the opening of the new Union Gospel Mission just very, very recently, which is a fantastic facility. And if you have not yet visited that, I certainly encourage you to do so. There is an enormous amount of work that the city is doing and that the nonprofit community is doing. The problem is it's a very big problem, and the numbers out there are still greater than what our current capacity is. And it's going to take continued years into the future of this particular kind of work to continue to draw down the unsheltered population outside in particular. And that's all of our focus. So this new navigation center is really going to be part and parcel with a lot of that stuff. And before I get into that, one of the questions I think I really need to answer is, why do we need it? Why can't this particular population go to the traditional shelters, or why can't we build more of the traditional shelters to serve this a group of folks? And it sort of gets right at the heart of what TJ's question was about low barrier. Why do people need low barrier? What is low barrier? Well, the fact of the matter is, the reason we have such a large unsheltered population, which is what the city is working to reduce, what I'm working to reduce, what all of us across the state are trying desperately to end eventually. The reason we have that is incredibly complex algorithm that goes back 70 years of failed public policy choices, the decline of working class housing across the United States, the rise of an opioid epidemic in the last 20 years, along with a larger drug problem, the end of, as we knew it in the 70s and 80s, of traditional mental health services, which has dramatically declined the number of people in institutions of care across the country the last 50 years. It's an incredibly complex problem that needs multifaceted answers. There's no one size fits all solution. There's no magic bullet. There's no quick fix. It's going to take, a wide range of options and choices and plans and designs into the future to get this successfully addressed. So why people don't shelter in traditional shelters is, unlike all the stuff I just said, fairly easy. The biggest reasons that people don't go into the shelters that we've had to date really fall into one of four groups. People don't want to go inside because of pets or partners, or drugs or alcohol. It's usually one of those four things. So frequently people outside because they have need for companionship and they've lost their families in a variety of different ways, either because of separations or because of people passing away, or a whole laundry list of things. They've developed really immense, tight emotional bonds with their pets, and they're not going to give up their pets to go into a traditional shelter. That requires them to surrender them or to find another home for them. Many folks outside, often for safety reasons, have made, have girlfriends and boyfriends. Many are married. They have relationships, and they don't want to be separated from one another to go into the traditional shelters. And the traditional shelters also have sobriety requirements. They cannot be actively drinking or using drugs and still come in there and sleep at night. And for many of them, that is just a bridge too far. And if you live outside long enough, if you did not have a mental health problem, if you did not have a substance abuse problem before you went outside, you certainly do by the time you've been out there for a couple of years. So the consequence of all that becomes very challenging when you begin to ask yourself, what can we do to design sheltering options for people to come inside? There's actually a lot of clinical evidence, medical evidence from research over the past decade that shows that staying outside for long periods of time physically changes the structure of your brain. When you're focused each and every day on the 6 inches in front of your face, on surviving, that changes your outlook on everything from the choices that you're making, to how you dispose of trash, to your behavior toward other people. It becomes a very difficult situation for people to break free from. So a navigation center is just another tool in our toolkit, so to speak, that allows us to target a population that doesn't seem to have any other answers at all. So a navigation center is very simple in its design. The idea is you create a place where you bring a cohort of individuals in. It's not a traditional shelter. It's not even a traditional low barrier shelter where we make exceptions for pets and partners and drugs and alcohol. It is a specific product that is designed to get a cohort, group maybe of 35 or 40 people at a time into that shelter, and begin to reduce some of the trauma that they have, reduce some of the barriers that they have. And then when they graduate, so to speak, it's a transitional kind of environment. When they graduate from that navigation center, we have a housing placement lined up for them once they exit. So a lot of traditional shelters, even a lot of low barrier shelters, they don't really have that housing exit outcome attached to them. We all pay good lip service to that and say, well, we're trying to work toward that, but they don't have an attached housing placement to the end of it. So in many cases, those low barrier shelters become a kind of warehousing philosophy where you're just putting people in there, keeping them in there long term because you don't have other answers for them. Ultimately, that is a failed strategy because sheltering is incredibly expensive. And if you're just sheltering for the sake of sheltering, you're not reducing the homeless population. You're not really, getting anywhere where you can say that we're making positive progress in terms of, getting people's lives back in their own control, other than the fact you've reduced the probability that they're going to pass away outside. So it's not a very successful strategy unless you have exit outcomes attached to it. So the idea of a navigation center is we take 35 to 40 folks at a time, and we get them in there and we begin to work on their barriers. One of the biggest barriers, and people don't talk about this very much, is just their behaviors. And a lot of times those behaviors are triggered by, more than anything else, not just the drugs and alcohol and the mental health, but just by a lack of sleep. The homeless community tends to sleep at the time of day that it's safest, which is broad daylight, which is why you frequently see people sleeping on downtown streets in the middle of the day. And then at night they're up because they're in the most danger at night. Often when you first put people into these low barrier situations, whether it was the motel program we ran this winter, where we housed about 140 of these very same sorts of people in market rate motels around the city of Salem. At times, we had up to 180 in those 140 motel rooms, and they'll sleep for days and days and days because it's the first time that they've had the opportunity to sleep in a safe place behind a locked door. And as they begin to regularize their routines and the amount of sleep that they're getting, hopefully begin to reduce the amount of drugs and alcohol that they're consuming, some of those barriers begin to come down. And then it's case management staff that works with this particular small cohort, this particular small population, then begins to work on their other barriers. And the most frequent one is they lack documents. They don't have birth certificates. They don't have ID cards. They don't have driver's license. They don't have all the documentation that's necessary to get somebody into housing. So when we started HRAP 4 or 5 years ago at this point, one of the things that we discovered is, we can identify them, we can assess them, we can determine their vulnerabilities and all the barriers that they have. We can certainly put them in a unit, but it's a very big challenge taking somebody who's lived outside for 8 years and then shoving them into an apartment. There's a trauma for the client that's associated with immediate housing. And some people are very well geared to deal with that and some are not. I've had folks that I've housed. There was one guy up north in Portland once, for example. He had been outside. He was a homeless vet. He'd been outside for about 10 years. The first day he went into his apartment, he just walked in, he dropped his bags in the living room, and he stood there for maybe an hour, just watching the entire room, trying to figure out what it really was to him and what it meant to his life. And then that evening, he picked up his sleeping bag and he went down in front of the post office and he slept there. And he slept there for 2 weeks before he ever spent a night in the unit. So it takes time to kind of transition people out of this unsheltered situation where all the rules are different from all the rules that you and I follow every day, and to get them to a place where they can successfully handle a housing placement. So that's the purpose of a navigation center. Really very simple. We take a very small group of people. We work with them very deliberately. We have an exit outcome associated with the end of their term, and hopefully it's not very long, 60 to 90 days, sometimes a little bit longer depending on individual circumstances. It's kind of a bridge housing. It's a bridge between a shelter situation and a permanent housing placement. And the great promise of it, although I don't want to overpromise and I don't want to create false hope, and I don't want to promise anybody that we're going to next summer in 2022 that there's not going to be another Market Street, and the year before that there were the camping situation under the bridge in the downtown, and the year before that Wallace, and on and on and on. It's going to take time for us to reduce this particular impact down to a level that you're not going to notice it as much. But it is a very successful strategy, and it will help us get folks placed into permanent housing, successful housing, which over the course of the last 5 years, even with HRAP alone, just one particular program, we've had an 85% success rate of keeping those folks in housing for 2 years. So that's a really good success rate. So it's different, but it is a very targeted sheltering activity. Unlike traditional sheltering activities, it's very low barrier. That does not mean, as was pointed out earlier, that there are no rules. Behavior gets you in, and behavior absolutely will get you out. When you're there, you're not going to be, shooting up heroin on the premise. You're going to be expected to follow all the rules of the project, just like they had to follow the rules of all the other projects that we have around town. We, like all of our other partners and the city, are always very concerned about the impact of any of these facilities on the neighboring communities. And so I think some of the concerns is that there will be greater crime associated in that neighborhood with this particular project. This is going to look very different than anything you've seen before. It's not going to look like the Arches parking lot, where we're running a day center where the entire homeless population of Salem can just drop in, hang out, get a drink of water, get a meal, talk to folks, that sort of thing. It's not going to look like that. It's going to look more like our motel project, where people are there for a specific activity. People who are not participating in that activity are not going to be there. And, the crime that's associated with homelessness generally, historically, is primarily associated with a concentration of unsheltered camping. So we had a lot of criminal activity that was associated with the Wallace camp, especially as the spring wore on. We had a lot of criminal activity that was associated with the Cascade camp, especially as the spring wore on. When you get large concentrations of unsheltered, unmanaged camping, that's when those sorts of things happen. But when you get people into programs and projects like this, I'm never going to promise anybody's behavior. I'm never going to promise nothing isn't going to ever happen. But the odds of something happening in this particular situation are far, far reduced than leaving 1,000 people outside to sort of, fend for themselves. So I'd be happy to answer any questions about the Navigation Center.
So let's see, there's a question here. Brent Hart says, I feel it'll look more like CAA block. I don't know what that means. Brent, do you want to expand on that? And why do you think people will not camp on the sidewalk if there is no place, if there is a place to go get services?
Yeah, that's my question. They go to CAA, their community action agency, for the Arches block for services. They're going to go here for services. Why is there confidence that people will not be camping on and around the building?
People won't be camping on the property. And so that's a really interesting question. First off, I'm going to say that I have no confidence that people aren't going to camp anywhere at any particular time. A lot of it is terribly unexpected at times. You'll get people setting up tent camps, even on parking strips and on landscaping strips and that sort of thing, historically, in very odd places. So 2 winters ago, we had, Brent, several camps that were along both of the landscaping strips next to Arches. And they did that because it was close to the proximity of services. That is, when they got out of that tent in the morning, they could walk right in that door and get a meal. They could walk right in that door and use the restroom. They could walk right in that door and get help and assistance and those sorts of things. That's not going to be available at this Navigation Center. We're not going to be serving the general population out of that facility. So I have confidence that they're not going to camp close to that new Navigation Center for that particular reason. And it's sort of based also in our experience that we've ran motels and shelters and other homeless facilities all over town for the last 4 or 5 years. And the unsheltered population that's not engaged in those services don't tend to camp right outside of those facilities. The Arches project is different because it's really designed to be a service center for folks to come. My goal, hopefully one day, is that it's 24/7. I don't have the funding and the resources to be able to pull that off right now. But these other projects aren't really designed to be open to the homeless public, so to speak, at that level.
I know in past conversations with other nonprofits that are helping in this arena, there isn't really a great, what we call, client management system, for keeping track of folks. There's a program called Apricot. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Yes.
That people can, that some nonprofits use to keep track of folks who are coming in their doors. And I think that would be an excellent system for, sharing between nonprofits, so that we can see where somebody's been, what kind of services they've received. And then also, letting the police have access to it so that if they do get called to a scene, that they can see quickly, who might be some people that that know the person that's in question, and any mental health issues that the person might be dealing with.
So we have a system called the Homeless Management Information System. It's HMIS. Every homeless person in town that engages with any services has a record in HMIS. Those records are shared across all of the homeless service agencies. So when somebody shows up to get any service at Arches, if they show up to take a shower, they're scanned into the system. If they show up to get a particular meal, they're scanned into the system. If they show up for warming, they're scanned into the system. And in addition to that, we have an assessment protocol where we develop 100 data points on every homeless individual in the footprint. So over the course of the last 5 years, we've assessed nearly 7,000 homeless individuals. Of course, most people who become homeless don't stay homeless for very long. They're in the system, they're out of the system. There's a core, hardcore of folks who never leave it, it seems, without these specialized programs. But we have literally hundreds of thousands of data points on the homeless population. I can tell you what the rate of diabetes. I can tell you what the rate of AIDS. I can tell you what the incidence of hepatitis B is in any one geographic area of the city, because we geo-map that data as well. So our data has never been stronger. I think one of the barriers that you pointed out there is traditionally homeless projects don't share that information with the police department. But one of the things that we have done in the last 2 or 3 years in particular is that our working relationship with the city of Salem PD has probably never been stronger. So that when there are cases where public safety is in jeopardy, we are certainly sharing information and working with them very closely on certain client matters.
All right. Thanks for that. Jeff Miller asked a good question from the business side of things. Mayor Bennett or Gretchen, can you speak to the economics of the navigation center? Cost of the building, cost to modify the building for intended use, annual operating expenses. How is this being paid for? If with the grant, what happens when the grant dollars run out? Gretchen, you want to tackle that?
Yeah, you bet. I can begin that. And I would say that we have a big long-term question on the project that I think is going to be an important regional conversation. The building, I wish I had the number in front of me, but I think the building we acquired for somewhere around 2.7 or 2.8 million, if I'm not mistaken. And we initially had budgeted 3 million for the project, understanding we would need to make some improvements to the building to make it workable to meet life safety requirements. We're going to exceed that budget in the costs to get it going. We need to add sprinkles to the building to make sure that we meet the life safety standards. We've got a question about the roof and some other things. So we're in the midst of sorting the final cost, but we're going to exceed 3 million in just the building acquisition and preparations. And then in terms of the ongoing operations, we need to pinpoint exactly how many people are served before a community action agency can give us a concrete and formal budget. We've speculated, Jimmy, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but maybe 2 or 3 years of operating dollars that we have available. And I'll let you add on to that. But the city did the 3+ million on the acquisition. And then we're so grateful to the Oregon State Legislature for providing Salem with $5 million for operations. We're planning on entering into an agreement with a community action agency to operate the services at the site. And that should get us a couple few years, depending on the number of people and the level of services and staffing that are required to meet the outcomes. And then we've got a question, and I would submit it's a question for all of our sectors, speaking to Jimmy's observations about we're really trying to recreate systems that took decades in the making. It's cities have primary services that they do, police, fire, public works, infrastructure. It can't be predicted that cities immediately absorb the new arenas we need to go in and sheltering. And so I think it'll be a question for us all on how do we sustain the ongoing operations. But Jimmy, do you want to add to my comments about the budget?
Sure. So this is one of those really, when you're doing social work, especially at scale, it becomes an incredibly expensive thing and a very frightening thing because you're trying to build both long-term capacity and short-term solutions. That is, you're trying to respond to the community's need and at the same time design something that has the capacity to last and that it won't just be a quick shot in the arm and then go away, a wasted resource, a squandered opportunity, and then 4 or 5 years pass and then we're right back in the same place that we were before. So part of the problem here is that in Salem historically, until about 5 years ago, this has really not been a priority. Our social service community, it wasn't a priority. Primarily, we were working with lower needs individuals, people that we thought we could assist pretty quickly, that we could have 100% success rate with, and we really weren't working with the high needs individuals that are the ones camping under the Market Street Bridge. So as a result of that, and the fact that we're sitting in the middle of this nexus of law enforcement, incarceration, and mental health, in addition to all the other forces that are working to create homelessness, we've had a very serious problem, as the mayor said, develop here, especially over the last decade. And because neither the city, nor the county, nor the nonprofits really focused on this particular group of people, that population grew and grew and grew over time, while other cities and other counties and the state put an awful lot of resources into Portland and to Eugene in particular. So one example I'll give you is that 4 years ago, the city of Eugene had around 825 permanent supportive housing beds. Permanent supportive housing bed is a place where you place one of these very high needs clients with long-term case management assistance into a unit, into an apartment. Lane County, Eugene had around 825 of those 4 years ago. We had 22 by comparison. It just was not a priority. Now, today, we have around 300. We're going to be a little bit north of that pretty quickly. The budget for the Arches project 5 years ago was around $1.9 million. Even pre-COVID, it was up closer to 12 million. And of course, post-COVID, it's much higher than that. But the thing is, you always have to chase money in this work. So, this homeless issue statewide is not going away. Cities and counties are not going to be able to pay for it themselves. So we're going to have to rely on putting a lot of pressure on the state legislature to continue to make this a priority so that they will fund it adequately so that we have some fighting chance to be able to at least keep it where it is and make it hopefully smaller in terms of the number of people outside into the future.
Jimmy, you talked about housing, stable housing or stable shelter being a key in the rehabilitation of folks, just from the trauma that they suffer on the streets. And so my question is, I coached my kid's baseball team, my son's baseball team, and one of the boys on the team comes from one of Salem's first families, and they have a great house, great home, and his mom was dealing with mental health issues, and she lapsed into addiction issues and went from that to she's now on the streets.
Yep.
And so I just saw the role that the mental health piece, we don't have a community mental health hospital here.
No.
That was a decision that was made a number of years ago at the state level to keep the institutional model, which doesn't provide room in the inn. And so then we run into a situation where we're at right now with no community hospital. How much of an impact would that make besides the shelter?
Over the long term, it would be enormous. And part of this story is really the disinvestment by the federal level and the state level in mental health across the country over the last 50 years. So let's turn back the clock to around 1957. There were about 475 people per 100,000 in essentially what we would call mental health institutions. That's a pretty big number. And the decision was made in the late 50s and early 60s and into the 70s that most people would be much better off outside of these institutions and could live mostly independently as long as they had access to community mental health. And so the decision was made by the end of the 70s and into the early 80s. That number went from around 450, 470 down to around 20 per 100,000. Basically, all of those people went outside with the expectation that they would have access to local community mental health, which never was funded. So a lot of the people we see today, and I mean a lot, especially the ones next to the Rite Aid in the downtown, some of the ones under the Market Street Bridge, all of those that are suffering from really elevated mental health conditions 50 years ago would have been in some form of institutionalized care. And many of them don't need that level of commitment, but they need access to regular mental health facilities and community mental health in particular. It would make an enormous difference in terms of reducing the flow into the system. I sort of equate this to like a bathtub. You know, if the drain is open but not draining, and you still have the water spigot on, eventually, you know, the tub's going to fill up and the water's going to spill over the edge. And that's what's happened the last 20 years in particular. You know, we've been overwhelmed by the number of people who are outside, and we need to do something to open that drain up a little bit better and to turn back the spigot a little bit. And if we could do that, and if we could especially find some more ways to promote community mental health, it would have an impact. And I think that speaks to one of your questions. I don't want to interrupt you, Mayor. It speaks to one of the questions in the chat, but I'm going to let the mayor jump in because he has a little bit longer history with that particular issue than me.
And I just wanted to second what you were saying about mental health treatment here in Oregon. When I came out of college at Willamette, I went to work up at Damage State Hospital and was just one of the floor guys, one of the aides. The people that we dealt with were the homeless that were being brought in from the streets of Portland. And I would see in some cases over the few years I was there, get to know some people because they would come through at various times. They would come in, we would take care of them, get them stabilized, get them on a regimen of medication that's appropriate. They would go out, they would begin to fall off of that, begin to self-medicate with alcohol or drugs that were available on the street, and they would come back in the most serious health conditions, and then we would redo the cycle. And when they closed Damage, it absolutely changed the streets of Portland. The problem began in the 80s when they closed it, turned it into upscale housing in Wilsonville. And it's just I can't tell you how profoundly it changed and how quickly it changed. And we've seen it here in Salem with the closure of the state hospital. I don't think anyone understood how those state hospitals worked and the kind of clientele that really was the meat and potatoes of that business, which was trying to keep these folks in some sort of stabilized condition and accompany it with a social service net that allowed their families and their communities to be participants in this and help them as long as possible. This is a tragic failure of public policy.
It is.
And it's one that has been overlooked and ignored by the legislature. They've tried to figure out some Band-Aids, but given the numbers, and Jimmy, I think, describes it perfectly in sort of the 400s down to the 20s in terms of populations involved here, you could see it happening. And people, and then you couple it with the fact we've got the prisons here and things like that, and we've had Measure 11, other things that I'm sure all of us feel have been tremendous helps. They've also created a population that is unable to get housed. In some cases, we can't even put people who are on the streets with certain kinds of records into any kind of public housing.
Yeah.
They're just not eligible because of the crimes they've committed or been adjudicated for. This is one, and I heard Jimmy the other day on Brent's radio show say 30 years in the making, 30 years to get out. I can't stress enough how important it is that we keep our eye on the ball here, and that we not let go and somehow think there's a quick fix. There is nothing, sort of right now, the hot topic is let's have a van that runs around with a social worker. That's not going to solve it. That is not going to solve it. There is cops are not going to solve it. We can't, if they say it, I don't think people always understand what's being said, but we can't arrest our way out of this thing. This is going to take a concerted, focused community effort by the city, the state, and the county. And it's going to require both public and private resources, and particularly for programs like this, to keep them afloat. We're going to keep going back, or whoever succeeds me, I hope, will keep going back and maintain a relationship with the legislature that produces the kind of funding we need to correct the mistakes they made.
Yeah.
I just want to quickly answer a couple of questions in the chat. One, Dirk says, you know, what can be our realistic expectations about the number of people who let's pretend for a second that we had a shelter bed for everybody. Let's pretend for a second that we had 1,000 shelter beds. How many folks would turn that down, even if they were all low barrier? And the truthful answer to that is that it's going to be about a third. Part of the problem in this work, and if you work with HRAP or any of these other high needs programs, I've had to ask certain homeless clients 100 times, will you take housing? Will you take help? Will you take assistance? And I get told 99 times, and sometimes very colorful ways, no. But it's the 100th time, the one time that they say, yes, that's all I need. It's just like sales. You have to keep asking, you have to keep pushing, you have to keep trying. Eventually, everyone gets to yes, because eventually, if you're outside long enough, you're a victim of violence, you're aging, you're getting sick. And it's usually when people get sick that they're willing to let down some of their initial resistance and sort of follow the program, so to speak. So, you know, it will be the case that there will be folks outside for quite some time. No one is promising that, but we have to work, as the mayor just said, long-term to reduce this down to a situation where nobody's outside. Almost everybody in this chat room can remember a time when you didn't see what you saw the last two winters over around Rite Aid. It's not that far into the past. We just have to go back to that instead of, you know, resigning ourselves to the fact that, or to the belief that we really can't do anything. So we can't give up on this because the progress seems very slow. And then the other question from Michael was essentially about, hey, if we do this so well, if we're so good at this, while the rest of the country is so poor of it, are we going to bring people here? Are we going to attract more homeless into our region? Well, there's always a little bit of dumping, so to speak. You know, Portland has a ticket program where if they find somebody that they think needs to be reunited, and that's always very sketchy, with their family, they'll buy them a ticket and they'll send them back there. And that eastern communities and down south where I'm from, Texas in particular, you know, there's a lot of that, people buying bus tickets to send them to Oregon and California and Washington, but it's a fairly small percentage of the population. So I anticipated this question when we started HRAP. So as part of our assessment protocols, I asked everybody 2 additional questions. Where were they born and how long have they been in Marion or Polk counties? 85% of them were born within an hour's drive of Salem. Most of them, vast majority of them, had been here for 10 years or more. Now there's always a few, right? There's always a few who haven't been here very long, who got, you know, sent here from Seattle, and that draws everybody's attention, right? Because when the city of Salem PD, you know, talk to somebody and somebody hands them a Washington state license or a California license or an Alabama license, people remember that. So there's a little bit of observer error in there, but all the evidence that we have suggests that this population is heavily local. They've been here for an awful long time. So I'm not too worried about attracting people from the outside. There's always going to be a little bit of that, but what we really need to do is focus on the bigger problem of making sure that people who were born here in our community, who we went to church with, who we went to high school with, you know, all of those folks have the opportunity to find permanent housing.
Any other questions? So when is this going to be up and running?
Really good question. So we don't know yet. Our goal, I think, it's a loose goal, is sometime this winter. You know, once the city sends us a contract and once they decided that, you know, they've acquired the facility and they've done whatever renovations they want to do, it takes me about 60, 70 days in this market to hire all the people that I want to hire, and we can get started fairly quickly. This is August the 5th today, so I still have a lot of confidence that we'll have this up and running this winter.
Okay. All right, if you have a question, go ahead and ask it live, or you can put it into the chat. Is this going to be a resource for police? So I know that we're close to triggering the conditions for the no sit lie ordinance to be put into place. So is this going to be a resource for the Salem Police Department if they are enforcing the no sit lie, that they can pick up someone and take them to the navigation center?
I think we will have very close coordination with the City of Salem PD and Marion County PD and Polk County Sheriff's Office if they want to participate. I think what you'll see is, ideally, we're grabbing 30, 35, 40 people out of an unsheltered camp like what we saw the last year. The drop-offs get complicated because usually they're the worst behavioral problems that they don't want to take out to the Marion County Jail. But I think, especially if other jurisdictions want to invest in this, we would certainly find a way to help create specialized beds for PD drop-off in particular. This is not something the homeless problem is bigger than the City of Salem. It's something that both county governments really have to, and regional governments and the state government really have to continue to help support the operations. I think somebody asked a question earlier, what's this going to cost? Frankly, since it's a 24/7 facility, we're probably looking at somewhere around $1 million a year to do it right. Maybe up to $1.1 million, somewhere in that range to do it successfully. And most of that's staff cost.
And one of the things that I just want to mention, we've mentioned over the years, we still haven't successfully figured out how to fund, is a sobering center, a place where we can take the really knocked out citizen, and it can be one, it can be anybody. This isn't just a homeless issue, but we continue to not have a place for emergency services to take people who are in serious intoxication to just sober up. So we're going to continue to work on that one as well. We've figured out the capital. It's operations. It's who's going to pay for this? How are we going to pay for it? The City of Salem is flush today with some ARPA funds. We're taking advantage of this opportunity to beef up these programs. But again, the real question is sustainability and the real challenge for the community. And we rely on organizations like the Chamber and their leadership role to assist us in finding that kind of sustainable direction that will keep this kind of program going. I mean, this is just essential. It's essential to our economic future as well. It's a whole range of outcomes will have to be driven by this. And I hate to pass this along to the next council, but it's going to be multiple councils are going to have to stay the course as well.
Brent in the chat is asking a question that I'm asking as well. I am trying to see what I can learn about that. I'm focused on a lot of day-to-day operations about how do we improve management of public spaces and open alternative shelter sites and all of the things that we're discussing. But I have a intern with some expertise kind of starting to look at that question that Brent asked in the chat and feel that needs to be part of the conversation from where I sit. But I know we have a number of partners with that expertise, in the county mental health programs, the Northwest Human Services. That's more the expertise of our partners.
Yeah, I want to answer one of Brent's too, the psychiatric facilities. It's sort of, it's national. A tremendous part of this came out of the Reagan era in a deinstitutionalization drive at the national level, but it also occurred dramatically here in the state of Oregon. There's nothing partisan about it. Democrats and Republicans are, I think, supportive of how to deal with. I saw Raquel's here. She's very, she's inside. She knows what people are talking about at the legislature. It continues to be this issue, and it's reached such national and really international proportions that I think there'll be serious funding discussion. We got to, right now, the shiny ball is COVID, and we'll move through that, and there'll be another shiny ball, and we've got to try to keep them from getting off course on dealing with these mental health and addiction issues. They're really essential.
Yeah, I know. I have a friend of mine who works high up at Oregon Health Authority, and the amount of money that's coming in there that she has to try and spend on COVID it's ridiculous. And
yeah,
she was given a budget that she said, I have no ability to spend it. And then her director called her in and said, here's another 30 million, figure out what to spend it now.
Yeah, it's nuts. And it's getting, and you can watch the news every night and you become increasingly stunned by how much money is coming into us as local government, as state government particularly, but also down to the local level. This is a lot of money, and spending it wisely for the long term. I just got to tell you, I'm very proud of the work that's been done. I know by Marion County, and I know in the city of Salem that we are doing everything we can to make this investment work for the long term. I'm really, Steve Powers has been a really powerful director and on how to deal with these funds. And then we've got local nonprofits like Jimmy's program that really know how, they know where the money needs to be spent. They know how to do it. They know how to make it. They have the kind of data he mentioned that lets us measure outcomes. It's a good time to do it. It's just doing it. It just, and gearing up to do it with this kind of funding. Like your friend, I mean, somebody dropped $30 million on it. Sounds like money from heaven. It's not. It's a dilemma from heaven.
Yeah,
How do you deal with it?
So it's like Brewster's Millions.
Yeah,
can't figure out how to spend it.
Yeah, well, you're not ready. You haven't had this takes time and thought, and you know that, TJ. When you're dealing in public policy and public funding areas, you don't just go out and drop money on stuff. You just can't do it because that's not how it works to work any kind of long term.
Yeah.
Want to see that in action? Again, look north. Look north. You can see how not to do it.
Right. I think as a business community, we're going to keep an eye on this, because when you talk about sustainable funding, I think I was amused when you said that, because I was thinking about all the people who claim to be homeless advocates when they come down to testify at council, and all those people. I'd love to see them step up and be what are they willing to pay into this to support this organization, this ongoing operation, or are they going to turn and say, well, the business community should pay for it?
Well, the challenge for us is to assist them and give them places to place their energies and their treasure if they want to.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to find it through new taxes. We're going to find it in some different ways. I hope.
Yeah, I mean, I know when I go to these fundraisers for all the different nonprofits, and I look around the room, it's all the business people in town are there.
Same crowd, isn't it?
Supporting it. I mean, we're looking and we're good at spotting a good return on investment. So, if this is successful, it'll get supported by the business community willingly.
Well, I hope the business community and I know the chamber will, but when Jimmy talked about data that he has collected, it truly is remarkable how much information he has and how it can be used to explain that return on investment. I know you're interested in.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping that as we move forward on this, that there's a better coordination of services between all the different nonprofits that play a role in this arena.
Well, one of the things we set up, Councillor Hoy was going to be here today, was unable to be here, but a group got together, created the Mid-Valley Homeless Alliance. Jimmy's on it. And it brings together the governments, the nonprofits. It's actually an extraordinarily, I think, beginning to appear to be a highly successful coordinating and communication for folks that are working in this area. And I give a lot of credit to folks like Jimmy who know this stuff backwards and forwards. I'm really proud of the work Councillor Hoy and Mayor Clark have been doing as the co-chairs of it. Councillor Hoy has been very involved in this kind of project from Clackamas County as well as here. Our relationships with Marion County couldn't be better in terms of working our way through these issues. And the state of Oregon, I gotta tell you, they just keep stepping up. We keep asking, they keep stepping up. That's my experience having been an education lobbyist. You know, there's just never enough money. You have the absolute shameless job of looking people in the eyes. When they say, is that enough? You say no, and you explain how much more is needed. So we're gonna continue this idea of going to the state for payment in lieu of taxes. I'd like to see us replace that with direct funding from the state. And I think we've really begun to start to create that relationship.
Good. Yeah, I'll never forget. I was listening to, this is about 10 years ago when they were getting ready. I mean, there was the topic of mental health was fresh, and the state was going to double down on the institutional model. And Dave Hunt, who was then the speaker, yeah, he was on, and they had folks that were mental health experts, and he was saying, you know, the institutional model is the way to go. These community mental health facilities just don't work. And the mental health expert said, no, that's not true. It's much cheaper and much more effective. And you could just hear the silence was deafening. And so it is a state issue, and the state could step up and help us to get a facility going that would be that, provide that mental health piece, because it just overwhelms people.
Good.
So we're approaching the end of our time here today. Thank you. This has been a huge help. Thanks to Gretchen and Chuck and Jimmy for taking the time. I know you guys are spending lots and lots of hours outside of this meeting working on this issue, and we thank you for that. We look forward as a chamber to partnering with the city and with the nonprofits in our area to strengthen both, to make sure that these programs are as effective as possible. And we'll continue to be a partner in this with you. Thanks everybody for giving up an hour and a half of your time. I hope this is valuable to you. And we appreciate your investment of time in the chamber and in this meeting. And with that, we'll see you next month. We're going to be, some of us are going to be staying on and preparing future topics. So if you have any ideas for future topics that you'd like us to address, I know wildfire season is upon us, and we're going to be continuing to work on that as a topic of discussion, public policy. So if you have any other thoughts and things you want us to take on, please don't hesitate to put it in the chat feature right now. All right, thank you. Bye, Chuck.
Bye, TJ. Good to see you.
Thanks, buddy.